Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, join us in daily prayer and thanksgiving for Christ's most merciful heart. The Chaplet of the Divine Mercy, here on the Global Catholic Network, EWTN.
Family life from womb to tomb is our focus weekdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, beginning with At Home with Jim and Joy 3 days a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. On Tuesday, it's EWTN Pro-Life Weekly with Prudence Robertson. Then on Friday, discover how the scriptures can teach you how to pray for your sons and daughters and loved ones. At Home with Jim and Joy, EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, and How to Pray for Your Sons and Daughters and Loved Ones, a positive look at life and family. Weekdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern on EWTN.
O God, I hope with complete trust that you will give me, through the merits of Jesus Christ, all the necessary grace in this world and everlasting life in the world to come. For this is what you have promised, and you always keep your promises. Amen.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Tracy Sable tonight on EWTN News Nightly. Back at the Vatican, Pope Francis returns from his historic trip to Mongolia. We have a report on an important 4 days in East Asia. Crackdown on Catholics. How lawmakers on Capitol Hill are responding to the Ortega regime in Nicaragua. Personal journey. Sage Steele weighs in on why she left ESPN. And protector of the poor. A preview of a new movie featuring a beloved saint. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Teresa of Calcutta. Our top story tonight, Pope Francis is back at the Vatican following his 4-day visit to Mongolia. The Holy Father celebrated Mass, met with many of the country's faithful, and visited a charitable organization.
Non si misura sulla ricchezza economica.
On his final day in the East Asian nation, the Holy Father told volunteers that they are living up to the call from Christ to feed the hungry. He also said that charity demands professionalism, but charitable works should not turn into businesses. It was the first time a pope had visited Mongolia. Joining us now from Rome is Courtney Mares, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Courtney, so good to be with you. We know that Mongolia only has a little more than 1,400 Catholics. So curious, why did Pope Francis make the roughly 10-hour flight to the East Asian country?
Pope Francis is known for traveling to the peripheries of the world to visit places no pope has gone before. And with this historic trip, the Pope said he was coming to visit Mongolia's small flock and the many Catholic missionaries who've given their lives to help bring the gospel to this faraway country. But you know, right off the bat, it became clear to us that this trip also had greater geopolitical significance for the Vatican, just beyond Mongolia's borders. Mongolia is a country sandwiched between Russia and China, and in the Pope's first speech, he spoke about the importance of peace and religious freedom. Catholics from across Asia also traveled to see the Pope from Vietnam, South Korea, Hong Kong, and even mainland China.
And Courtney, I know during his visit, the Holy Father mentioned neighboring China. What was his message about China and to the Catholics from that country who made their way there to Mongolia?
That's right. Pope Francis gave a surprise shout out to Chinese Catholics at the end of his Mass in Ulaanbaatar. He brought up 2 bishops from Hong Kong, the current bishop and a bishop emeritus, to the altar to stand by his side and held their hands as he expressed warm affection for the Chinese people and asked Chinese Catholics to be good Christians and good citizens. Now, each day I was in Mongolia, I encountered small groups of Chinese Catholics who'd come to the papal events to see Pope Francis. And at first, many of them were very hesitant to speak to the press and tried to even shield their identities using face masks and sunglasses out of fear of potential retribution from the government. But we also saw, especially during the Mass, people enthusiastically waving Chinese flags and cheering loudly when Pope Francis spoke to them, especially during that shout out at the end of the papal Mass.
Yeah, and Courtney, I also know that you were on the plane with Pope Francis for that in-flight press conference during the 10-hour return flight from Mongolia. Pretty exciting. What was the breaking news from the papal plane?
Well, for the first time since the Vatican-China deal was signed 5 years ago, Pope Francis gave us a glimpse into what could be in the controversial secret agreement signed by the Holy See in Beijing in 2018. The Pope revealed the existence of a joint commission between the Chinese government and the Holy See on the appointment of Catholic bishops in China that is presided over by Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin. The Pope also described for us the Vatican's relations with China. He said they're very respectful, although the Pope did not mention that China has violated the agreement twice in the past year, according to the Vatican, by unilaterally appointing 2 Catholic bishops, including the Bishop of Shanghai. Pope Francis also told us that the Vatican and China have engaged in foreign exchanges with Catholic priests and professors teaching at a Chinese university, something that he described as an example of openness on the part of the Chinese. It was a 40-minute press conference, so Pope Francis also discussed a number of other topics, including the Vatican's diplomatic relations with Vietnam, his upcoming update to his environmental encyclical Laudato Si', as well as the Synod on Synodality Assembly, which will be happening just next month. Pope Francis was asked 3 questions about the Synod during his press conference, and he outlined his vision for the upcoming assembly. Pope Francis said that he wants it to be a prayerful exercise in dialogue, and he repeated to us multiple times that there's no room for ideology or political chatter at the Synod on Synodality.
Oh, Courtney, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you, Tracy.
Back here in Washington, the White House press secretary says President Joe Biden continues to be tested at a regular cadence for COVID-19. This after First Lady Jill Biden came down with the illness and is experiencing mild symptoms. For now, she's staying at home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. The COVID testing protocols for the president come as he prepares to embark on an overseas trip. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports.
That's right, Tracy. Later this week, President Joe Biden heads to India for the G20 Summit. He'll also sit down for a bilateral meeting with India's Prime Minister. And in the briefing room today, an update on the president's health, as well as a preview of the upcoming summit.
With President Joe Biden being tested for COVID.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre tells reporters,
I can tell you that the First Lady is experiencing mild symptoms and will remain in Delaware for the week. President Biden tested negative last night for COVID-19 and tested negative again today. He's not experiencing any symptoms.
Also at today's briefing, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan discussing President Biden's upcoming trip to India.
And we hope this G20 summit will show that the world's major economies can work together even in challenging times.
In addition, the U.S. believes North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will soon travel to Russia to meet with President Vladimir Putin. Russia looking to buy ammunition. North Korea wants food and transfers of sophisticated weapons technologies.
And we will continue to call on North Korea to abide by its public commitments not to supply weapons to Russia that will end up killing Ukrainians.
The Biden administration also defending sending Vice President Kamala Harris to the ASEAN summit in place of the president. The vice president landing today in Indonesia, where she'll meet with other leaders to discuss everything from economic development to public health. During her trip, she's also expected to address the humanitarian crisis in Burma, the war in Ukraine, and threats posed by North Korea and China. Also today, President Biden awards a Vietnam veteran with a Medal of Honor. Captain Larry Taylor from Chattanooga, Tennessee, was a first lieutenant back in June 1968 when he helped rescue troops on the ground using a helicopter designed for just 2 people. Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Nicaragua's government, led by President Daniel Ortega, continues to escalate efforts to silence the Christian faithful. His targets include the Catholic Church, church officials, and even a leading bishop. U.S. lawmakers and government officials are stepping up efforts to secure more religious freedom in the country. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has more. Eric?
Good evening, Tracy. You know, Nicaragua's seizure of a Jesuit-run university last month is the latest episode in the government's campaign to silence the Catholic Church. Since 2018, Catholic priests and laity critical of the government have been harassed, exiled, imprisoned, tortured, and even murdered. The U.S. Ambassador for International Religious Freedom says the crackdown is getting worse.
We're also seeing more direct violence on the ground in Nicaragua. And the repression of the church itself, the Catholic Church itself, seems to be great, where you have the government going in and arresting so many of the religious leaders.
In a high-profile case, the Ortega dictatorship accused Bishop Orlando Alvarez, a government critic and staunch advocate for religious rights, of treason and sentenced him to more than 26 years in prison. Currently, his whereabouts and health are unknown. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops recently released a statement saying, in part, quote, "The continued incarceration of Bishop Alvarez is unjust and must end as soon as possible." Critics add, no person or institution of faith is safe in Nicaragua.
Religious leaders in a position where they're very cautious about what they can preach about. And you've got communities that are concerned about whether they can't even be going to church, can't be seen as affiliated with these, religious institutions.
Longtime religious freedom advocate, Republican Congressman Chris Smith tells me the status quo is unacceptable and the Biden administration needs to do more.
There needs to be real action. You know, you can't coddle a dictatorship and expect anything but for the abuse to accelerate and get significantly worse. And that's what's happening with Ortega.
It's time for the international community to wake up to this historic evil and for the Biden administration to take action.
Congressman Chris Smith has written to President Ortega demanding proof that Bishop Alvarez is alive and that he'll be allowed access to medical care. The State Department has also placed Nicaragua on the list of countries with high incidence of human rights abuses. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including coronavirus and kids. Analysis of what the new school year could look like amid another wave of COVID-19. And a former ESPN host tells us about the tough decision to leave the network and how she is walking in faith.
Hello, family. Our foundress, Mother Angelica, wanted EWTN to reach every inch of ground so people worldwide could know Jesus, His Blessed Mother, and the saints. With you at our side, EWTN is continuing Mother's mission. With our television broadcasts, we're now available in over 400 million homes in more than 160 countries and territories. Also, EWTN Radio is available through SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, over 600 radio affiliates, and worldwide shortwave radio. Our news covers domestic and international events on EWTN News Nightly, EWTN News in Depth, the world over, and more, as well as through the Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register. The Aussie Group shares news from Africa, South America, the Middle East, and much more with a worldwide audience. Just as Mother Angelica envisioned, EWTN inspires people worldwide with the gospel message. But we need your help to continue this work of evangelization and to reach more souls. Will you make a donation today to help tell the world about the faith? Every gift makes a difference. Thank you, and God bless you.
EWTN is 100% viewer supported. Your gift today keeps EWTN on the air and shares the joy of the gospel with the world. Please make a gift by going to EWTN.com/help today. You may also call us at 1-800-447-EWTN or send your donation to EWTN, 5817 Old Leeds Road, Irondale, Alabama, 35210.
COVID-19 begins to spread across the country. A number of institutions, including city governments, hospitals, schools, and even Hollywood studios, are reviving mask mandates. The latest data from the CDC shows an 18.8% week-over-week increase in cases. With the school year starting or having already started, the uptick is raising a number of questions. Specifically, how will the virus affect classroom learning? And here to help answer those questions is Julie Gunlock, director of the Independent Women's Forum. Julie, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. Given this information, how big of a concern do you think mask mandates and potentially school closures will be this year?
Look, I think this is a big concern, and parents need to be aware that this could happen. We know that the teachers' unions are eager to close schools, to put in mask mandates, and they have strong allies, not only the president, but the heads of the FDA, the heads of the CDC. And we know that the teachers' unions influenced those agencies to delay the opening of schools and to extend masking of children. It could happen again. We're already seeing this in some institutions. For instance, at the university level, there have been some very restrictive COVID mandates put in place. We're seeing it in business. We're even seeing it in a Hollywood studio. So this is happening again, and parents especially need to be aware that the learning loss that occurred the last time they closed schools, it can't happen again.
Yeah, we've already seen school districts in Kentucky and actually one in Texas already shut down this year due to COVID cases and teachers. You know, what's your take on these actions? Do you think this is an overreaction?
Absolutely. Look, we are even seeing it from the White House. They issued a statement saying that Jill Biden has COVID. It is not necessary to issue a press statement about Jill Biden's COVID status. This pandemic is over. We have moved on. And what we're seeing now is a stoking of the fear that people have naturally of COVID. But we're seeing a little bit of stoking of that fear, of reminding people that, oh, this could be a disaster. This could all happen again. And again, there's a reason for that. It's control. So we have to be prepared for that. We have to write our legislatures. We have to write our policymakers and let them know that this can't happen again.
Yeah, what about the teachers' union? I mean, how big of a role do you think they're going to play in all of this in the decision-making process?
Enormous. Again, they are the ones who sent a letter to DOJ asking the Department of Justice to investigate parents who went to school board meetings and complained about the school closures and about the masking. They are enormously influential. And again, we know that they influenced the FDA and the CDC to extend masking the last time around. So the teachers union, it's not only that. Let's not forget, the teachers union even managed to get teachers to the front of the line for vaccines, even above elderly. They also used the COVID sort of disaster and closures in order to get more money, most of which that COVID funding has not even been spent. So we really do have to worry about the teachers unions. I think it's really important, too, to say that the teachers union, this is Randy Weingarten, right? These are very powerful unions. They create and nurture a culture of silence among not only parents, but teachers. There are a lot of well-meaning, wonderful teachers out there that don't want schools closed. So when I talk about we have to be careful about the teachers unions, it really is the unions. I think there are a lot of very concerned teachers out there who don't feel like they can speak out.
Julie, I want to pivot to something else right now that's been in the news. There are reports in Canada that an excavation of suspected mass graves of Indigenous children in residential schools have actually turned up no human remains. Back in 2021, there were claims that thousands of children were buried there, and the Catholic Church did run several of those residential schools. And Pope Francis, as we know, even issued a formal apology. Julie, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, well, it's turned out that they are not finding human remains on the cited land where these Catholic schools existed. And this is a really horrible story. Look, there's no doubt that the Pope was very upfront, apologizing for any abuse that the Catholic Church might have had a role in. But this idea that there are these mass graves that were created by these Catholic churches and the faculty and administration of these Catholic churches, this appears to not be true. But it was even before they started the dig and they started to look for any evidence, this became sort of fact. You had Prime Minister Justin Trudeau basically saying, this is terrible. This is a terrible thing that happened, and sort of smearing the Catholic Church. And that he wasn't. I mean, one very very important Canadian official named Harsha Wale, the head of the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, said, burn it all down. And she meant the Catholic Church. And as a result, there was vandalism and even the burning up to the ground of some Catholic churches. So this became a moral panic and hysteria. And again, this all happened before there was any evidence. And now it turns out, after doing the work to look for evidence of these mass graves, there's no evidence of human remains there. So it's a horrible episode. And I really do think that some of the leading Canadian politicians are responsible, not to mention the Canadian media, which again stoked this moral panic.
Yeah, we're going to continue to follow this story. We know you will as well. Julie, thank you so much for coming on. Always appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, out of the game, sports anchor Sage Steele tells us why she said goodbye to her dream job and the reason behind the decision. Plus, a new movie examines the extraordinary life of Mother Teresa.
A humble Franciscan friar, tormented by the stigmata, yet fueled by an intense desire to daily consecrate the body and blood of Christ. See the miraculous story of Padre Pio come to life in a film that follows his ascent to one of the most beloved saints of all time. Experience the breathtaking portrayal of the Friar of San Giovanni Rotondo, Padre Pio, Between Heaven and Earth, Part 1, here on EWTN.
It's another news day in Washington, D.C. Time for the EWTN News Nightly team to go through stories they're going to cover.
I have an interview with the Senate Minority Whip about a new bill that they plan to introduce later this week.
The president is coming back from Camp David. I plan on being on the South Lawn to get some comments.
Every weekday, the EWTN News Nightly team is planning, monitoring, and doing whatever it takes to bring home the news and issues that are important to Catholics.
We just lined up the interview for the A block. That works.
All day long, the EWTN News Nightly team continues to watch out for breaking news and updates that impact the stories they're covering.
We just got video from the White House.
Let's cut back on the Q&A with the guest in studio to fit it in. Okay, that sounds good.
From our nation's capital to the center of the Universal Church of the Vatican, no one delivers more news from a Catholic perspective.
Thanks so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable.
EWTN News Nightly. Clear, concise, Catholic.
The Board of Education in Alaska has voted to support banning biological males from competing in girls' high school sports. Supporters say the measure ensures fairness in girls' sports. The proposal now heads to the Republican Attorney General. At least 22 states have laws that prevent biological boys from competing on girls' sports teams. Well, one person who knows a lot about women's and girls' sports is Sage Steele, a longtime sportscaster and a staple on ESPN for more than a decade. But when she appeared on a podcast in 2021 and gave her opinion on the COVID vaccine mandates and a few other topics that some deemed controversial, things changed. Steele says that she was taken off of assignments and her dream job became a hostile work environment. She filed a lawsuit alleging her free speech rights were squashed, and earlier this month, she and the network settled the suit. And Sage Steele joins us now to talk about her journey, what's next, and how her Catholic faith is carrying her through it all. Sage, so good to be with you. A lot I want to discuss, but first, I want to ask you about women's sports and what we're seeing right now with transgender athletes. I mean, we just mentioned that Alaska is banning biological males from competing in girls' sports, and at least 22 other states have similar measures in place. So I want to get your thoughts on that, and where do you think all this is going?
First of all, I commend those lawmakers and governors in those states who are enacting those laws and signing them into law. It makes me crazy that they even have to waste their time doing this for something that we all know is ridiculous, that we've had to go to these lengths and these depths of conversations to discuss. This is not controversial. I have said this for months and months and months.
That whole science word that everybody threw at us during COVID, and they wanted us to follow the science. We're following the science with this, and everybody knows the differences between men and women, especially on the sports field, court, whatever. It just makes me sad because, I've worked, and I'm sure you have as well. I mean, so many years trying to uplift other women, especially women in sports. And I've done work with Billie Jean King and so many of these true trailblazers who were part of all the greatness that has come to women on the sports field, thanks to Title IX. And I really am shocked at how many steps backwards we continue to take, and really big steps quickly. To me, and I've said this before, I will continue to say it, if we don't continue to address it and be loud about it, right? And push these lawmakers to do what they're doing in Texas and Alaska and other states, we're in trouble, because we have seen some things in some instances where young women have been hurt.
Yeah, and we have got to talk about, and thank you so much for talking about it and kind of keeping the pressure on. I also want to talk about you now. I know this really has been, quite a time for you, especially since you settled your lawsuit last month and left ESPN. So I'm wondering, how are you doing, Sage?
Oh, thank you for asking. I think it's a good question. Should be a simple answer. I'm doing well because I have really good perspective. I have a really great circle around me. Right before I sat down to speak with you, Tracy, I was upstairs talking to my mom. And I have a lot of other things going on in my life outside of my unemployment factor, I guess, right now, with my parents and a move recently, and my dad's health with 2 kinds of cancer, kids in college, my senior in high school, and she's a girl. There's always drama with girls, right? So there's a lot that has kept me distracted. I'm kind of getting over the sadness part, which is nice. I'm getting over the sadness of not being there with a couple of my awesome teammates, because I know that I'm right where I'm supposed to be, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable.
I want to talk, just kind of give people perspective, kind of what led up to your lawsuit. I know you said a few things during a podcast a few years ago. Wasn't on the network, wasn't for the network, but it did get you into some hot water. For those not familiar, can you tell us what exactly it was you said in that podcast, in particular what it had to do with the vaccine mandates, and really kind of made you, if I can say this, a pariah in a way?
Yeah, I will say I've talked so much about it, and it's so well documented. I don't want to get too much into it anymore. I am trying to kind of move past it. I think the whole point of my lawsuit is lack of consistency. And we cannot allow, and this is not just for ESPN or Disney, it's for any corporation, right? But we cannot allow some people to speak their minds about anything they want, and then others who might have a differing opinion to be silenced, and not just silenced, but punished and made an example of. So all I ever wanted was consistency and the rules to be the same for everybody. I think I happen to be the only one speaking out with maybe somewhat center-right opinions. And again, I did it, to your point, on my off day, not on our airwaves, when everyone else has been able to talk about very political things, non-sports related, on ESPN airwaves. And so the hypocrisy was really thick for me. And it had been many years leading up to that, many examples, and that was just enough. I will say about the vaccine, and it was not about the shot, it's about the mandate and being forced to do that. And I complied. I took that shot, even though I didn't agree with it. I didn't believe in it at that time. I know I won't be taking any ever again, that's for sure. Vaccines, boosters that are related to COVID, I won't. Because I think we've learned a lot. All I wanted at that time 2 years ago was to have more research and science around it. Let me learn about it before we do this to ourselves and more importantly to me, is my kids. And then I was forced to do something. I complied. I had an opinion about it while complying, and then was silenced for that opinion. So, I think it's funny if I had gotten out and said, shame on my neighbors over there. They're anti-vaxxers and they don't care about me or anyone else. I probably would have been celebrated, because a lot of people did say that I work with, and no repercussions there. So let's just, as corporations, as leaders, let's just be consistent with the rules, and then you don't have these issues.
And our conversation continues tomorrow. And in part 2 of our interview with Sage Steele, she tells us about her Catholic faith and the prayers she recited every day before work at ESPN. And as we mentioned earlier in the newscast, today is the feast of St. Teresa of Calcutta. And in India, members of her religious order were among those paying their respects. Our church leaders and others gathered at the Missionaries of Charity building in Calcutta. They remembered the religious sister who died 26 years ago today. Mother Teresa was canonized back in 2016. She remains an inspiration to people around the world. Well, finally tonight, there's also a new movie coming out about the life of Mother Teresa.
Most people, when in total doubt, just give up on their dreams. But she didn't.
Mother Teresa and Me weaves together the story of 2 women both experiencing self-doubt. The film premieres tonight at an event in New York, and it will be released in 800 theaters early next month. The executive producer says that he hopes the movie inspires people to follow the example of Mother Teresa in spreading small acts of kindness to make the world a better place, and she did indeed. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.